expanded into commercial work, and then we sort of expanded into community work as well. And that's sort of where the basis of our partnership with Greenlink on the Decatur Clean Energy Plan sort of fell together. Started working with Matt with the City of Atlanta on the Atlanta Clean Commercial Building Energy Efficiency Ordinance, and have been working together on other projects since. So we're very excited to tell you about how we approached the City of Decatur Clean Energy Plan, and really sort of tell you my focus is going to be on the community engagement aspect. That's sort of a specialty that I have within Southface, and we designed the plan itself to maximize that, just because Decatur really calls for it, and we'll sort of get into some details about it. Great picture here of the square in Decatur, and it is a small suburb of Atlanta. One of the actually predates Atlanta, and but it is out to the east. I forget the population, but it is a very urban place. But also very green neighborhoods surrounding it. So a very progressive city. And so we're really pleased to have been partnering with them on many projects, but really especially this one. So if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about how we kicked off that engagement. That was sort of the cover slide from some of our engagement. And so we used a wide variety of engagement tools during the process. It all culminated in a thing called a charrette, which is an integrated planning session in which we bring in all sorts of experts and community members and stakeholders along the way. But I'll get to some details on that. But that's sort of all of these sort of interactions, community interactions, were in support of that ultimate session where we really designed and built the plan itself. And so we did in that lead up to the charrette, we did stakeholder interviews. Decatur is home to many professionals who work in the clean energy industry, as well as advocates who sort of advocate at a variety of levels in the state and in localities in the state. And we also interviewed local elected leaders, and that process included a stakeholder analysis, and that is part of the process to sort of understand where people are and to get their input, to get ideas mainly, but also to sort of expose limits. We really came to understand some of the regulatory limits that were in place in Georgia, and then also just to find some things that maybe we want to deliver. And so an example of that is that the houses of worship were identified as a big opportunity in Decatur, and we had we added stakeholders and expanded the deliverable to include a program for the houses of worship. So that's the part of that whole process of defining what the deliverable is. So we're going to go to the next slide. And but then Decatur, as I mentioned, was already very active and had a lot of community members who are well educated. And so normally part of a charrette, you want to educate people about the topic area so that they can help have better engagement. But really it was at another level on in Decatur. So we did some Clean Energy 202s, as what we call them, which were local experts speaking on everything from how to make your house more efficient, try to get past some of the myths about energy efficiency, to the living building certified building at the Georgia Tech campus, the Candida Center. And that really, that sort of information people really enjoyed, and sort of helped them understand what some of the challenges, but also the opportunities, and let them engage and get some of their questions answered, which really sort of ties people into the process. And then we really had the sort of core of the initial engagement around some roundtables. We were in the middle of COVID still, so these were conducted virtually, and we had three topics you can see listed here. The the real goal here was to do a little bit of education and then do an interactive board for people to give input on that process. We're going to show you a board here. That's sort of the gist of what we're doing with the interactive element in this meeting. So we get prepared for that here in a little bit. So the topic areas were presented. We had local leaders who were working in the various topic areas, in community equity being the first one. Clean energy and the economy, talking about economic development and how, not sending money out for utility fuels and bringing that economy in, what the benefits of that were, and then the built environment and how that can really lead the way toward a more clean energy future. So we had those sessions. And on the next slide, we'll sort of show you some of the results of that. This is one of the Miro boards we did. We got two different sort of options here. Miro is a subscription-based thing. We're going to be doing a jam board. You'll see that in a minute, but there's similar ways to allow everyone. And we had 45 people at one of these sessions and allow them to, you give them a question and allows community feedback, and you start to see themes and you can start moving these little Post-its around. So it really functions like a physical space where you have people putting up Post-it notes in a interactive session. So then on the next slide, we will see that we took all that information and pulled it together, shared it with our community, and led that into a public, an integrated planning charrette. And a charrette is really just another word for a session in which you gather all those stakeholders you can. It's usually a minimum really of 2 days. It can be as long as 7 days, depending on what you're doing. And you get everyone together, and it really has some benefits we'll talk about in a moment. But the origin of the charrette is it came out of the sort of new urbanist movement and its history of really needing to engage the community to sort of show what a transformational community can look like. And Southface started adopting it as a way to sort of bring in the sort of multiple experts that are necessary to have real breakthrough planning on any of these work. So we conducted that charrette. I'll get into some details in a moment, but it is very valuable in building enduring support for projects. And so you can imagine that, a project that's going to be, really 30 years of effort is going to need some support along the way. And then finally, we had a virtual open house as well as an in-person open house. And we had plan elements up and had people able to visit and make comments on that. So we were able to fine tune the final work. So on the next slide, we'll talk about, before we go to that, sorry, Daniel. We also built a big website that had all of these recorded sessions available for folks to be able to come and join and catch up, if you will, along the way, as well as to be able to go back and reference. And then now on the next slide, you'll see that one of our additional input processes was a survey, a very detailed survey. This QR code won't work, so don't worry about going to it, but you can go to Clean Energy Decatur to see the results of that. And so we were able to get over 200 respondents and really very engaged sort of folks, and you'll see some of the results here in a moment. But the next slide shows some of the results and how the bigger question is, where do we want to put our emphasis? And that's going to be a little bit of what the interactive exercise we're going to do here in a moment will do as well, and really broke it into three main sectors: residential, commercial, and transportation, and really sort of asked folks to sort of give us their inputs. We had a little bit of cross pointing. Everyone thought we should do a lot on transportation, but Decatur, already being fairly walkable, has a fairly low energy use comparatively. And the residential sector was pointing at the commercial sector, and the commercial sector said we've done a lot already. So it was a little bit problematic in that way, but that's sort of how you get input and how community engagement goes oftentimes. But as far as what the charrette sort of composes, on the next slide, you'll see our sort of what the sort of a little bit of results from some of these things. These were sort of the how much prioritization in each of those we were asking. And now on the next slide, you'll see where the sort of what the charrette was composed of. And so it was sort of the first one we'd ever done in a hybrid sort of setting, and it seemed to work all right. It's important to sort of maximize the amount of input. In the history of a charrette, the word charrette is French for little cart, and as I mentioned, it was used by the new urbanists. The process of a charrette, this sort of very large engagement to maximize the number of engagement of people in a process, sort of grew out of the design schools in France. And so the joke was that, or the reality was that you would not go to school in the design schools, the architecture schools. You would work in a studio of an architect, and you would get assignments from the school, and then the school would send around a little cart to collect all of the work. And so you had an assigned amount of time to complete the work. And the joke was that the architects, while they were working, would, as the little cart came around, would jump on the little cart and ride it, and all the way still working frantically on their drawings. And what that represents is it's a time-limited thing, right? So we have a lot of pre-charrette work. You can see here in the process, there's pre-charrette, charrette, and post-charrette type of work. And you really have to do all those steps because you really need to be prepared. You can't just sort of jump off into a charrette and not have done some of the pre-work. But it does put a time limit on the amount of time that's available, and that really creates the focus that's necessary. In this sort of social media world, we've got an ability to sort of get a lot of input, but we don't necessarily sort of put an end to that. And that's one of the key elements of a charrette, is putting the sort of brackets on the end of it, beginning and the end of it, so that there is really that focus to be able to have the opportunity to create projects. Benefits are that it democratizes input. If you have just a regular meeting, one loud voice could stand up and be overly influential in the process. It really helps people who are a little more introverted because they have multiple ways to give input, and it all sort of democratizes all of that out. And good ideas are uncovered, and the variety of engagement opportunities reduces feedback loops. And the idea there is that you have someone give some feedback and you put it into the process. They see that up in the planning process later, and they recognize it, and now they give it support, and they don't wait for the final plan to see whether it's in there. They sort of see it along the way, so now they understand that their input is there and has been valued and included. And so the actual days of, in our case, it was 2 days. We had a kickoff session, had the mayor here on this lower left picture give a presentation about some of the history and where it came from and the sort of the community initiative. Then in the middle of it, we met in this top right picture with departments of the city, garnering their input on how they would see meeting these requirements. And in the bottom right corner, we have the pictures of the closing session of the charrette, in which we have the actual strategies shared, and we have the ability to have other input and have actual physical post-it notes put up with notes and some dot voting. We'll see it in a minute on the process of sort of the red and yellow and green, sort of the stop and go analogy around that. Saw a question pop into the chat about foreign language. Obviously the website has translation abilities, and then all these sessions had sign in, and we were able to help people that needed. We were able to, because of the sign up process, we were able to identify folks who might need translation skills. So thank you for that question. So I think that's next to the end slide, or is that the end slide for me? Go ahead and go to the next. Yeah, and so I'll let Daniel take over and talk about the interactive workshop that we're going to use, sort of demonstrating that middle piece of what we were doing at the roundtables. Daniel?
All right. Thank you, Robert, so much for that. So we got a little exercise we're gonna try, and it's a scenario. I'll be posting the Jamboard link into the chat here momentarily.
Samantha did already.
Awesome. So the scenario is that a Midwestern suburban town with limited resources has tasked you with deciding which energy policies would be most beneficial for them to pursue. Some background of this Midwestern town is that a population of around 47,000 with a median income of 45,000 and roughly 6,000 residents experiencing an energy burden above 6% of their monthly income. So using the sticky notes, the green being should pursue, or orange of should not pursue, pick two policies to label as green and two to label as orange. And if you have any ideas or comments, go ahead and feel free to throw those in there with it. And I will start sharing the board. And y'all go ahead and have at it. I like seeing weatherization, someone who used to work in weatherization with a weatherization program for low income folks. That's it's a great thing.
If you click the menu in each post-it, you can put in some notes as well. So feel free to add some notes.
There's a good question in the chat. Daniel, if you can address that one.
I can speak to that a little bit. Hey, this is Kenneth Sercy. I'm an energy analyst with Greenlink. So that's a great question, and I like this because it brings up some of the important things that I think everybody wants to think about when they're doing an exercise like this. So generally, buildings are a really big source of emissions. So energy efficiency strategies for buildings tend to be a big ticket item. Transportation is usually a really big portion of emissions as well. It's usually not as big as buildings, but it tends to be a big chunk of community-wide. And then a few of these are related to municipal sector, which is really important in a lot of ways. Although for most cities, the municipal part of emissions tends to be pretty small relative to the community-wide. It might only be 1% or a few percent when it's in the scheme of the entire community. So hopefully that's some helpful context.
Oftentimes, the biggest user is the sewage treatment plant.
Okay, so I notice we have a very interesting note here, and I agree. And I would like to conduct a racial equity analysis to see which of these options might benefit those who are most impacted by the energy burden and who would benefit the most. Let's see here. Sorry, my screen is a little low here. with the solar lighting, we had a comment of hard to say how impactful this would be without knowing how electricity is generated in this context would it actually reduce emissions. Very true. That is something we would have to look in. A lot of the places in the Midwest are using fossil fuel as their, to my knowledge, I know where this hypothetical town is, which is based, I will let you know, kind of on the town I live in. We're a fossil, I believe we're a coal plant.
It's a great sort of point, Daniel. One of the things we did in Decatur, and you'll hear about the ACES tool here shortly. The Greenlink built out the ACES tool for Decatur, and it helped us in our analysis, and we shared results. And it did. As we were leading in, and in part of the roundtables, we shared sort of business as usual cases, and then some of the other options around the details you'll hear about. But we also allowed community members to do their own distribution of those numbers. So in addition to the sort of feedback we got from the survey, participants in the charrette were able to sort of basically see what the results would be of each of those percentages of their of the expenditure of resources on the carbon impact, if you will. And ultimately, you know, there was going to be a limit on what you can do, simply because of in the case of Decatur, the state regulatory environment creates barriers to getting to zero with the utilities. So that's one of the biggest things that are going to be challenges for all these municipalities that are pushing the clean energy future.
Yeah. Here's another one, and this is in regards to converting municipal buildings to solar. Depending on local and state laws, this might require no upfront cost and save money over time. It's a very, very good point on that one. All right. Anyone have any additional? Okay, we had see one last one here. Green for the walk and bike friendly, improves safety and well-being, reduces emissions, and saves money for residents. Very much so. Anyone have any comments or anything they'd like to add or explore before we move on with our presentation?
One quick thing, sort of addressing the racial equity analysis in Decatur in particular. You know, weatherization programs sort of prove out to be the ones that create many of the greatest equity benefits. So something to keep in mind when you're contemplating what to do in your city.
And I can actually second that. Before I joined Greenlink, I worked at a very small community-based organization in the city of Cleveland. We had a weatherization program, and it really did help the sectors of the ward I worked in that were predominantly Black and poorer. We added a whole lot of really good furnaces for those folks. And dropped their power bills significantly, especially in the wintertime. All right. With that, we will go ahead and move back to our presentation. Give me 1 second here, and we will give it over to Kenneth and Stephanie, and they will drive us on home talking about how the data aspect of it came about.
Okay, cool. Thanks a lot, Daniel. Hey, everyone. This is Kenneth Sercy again, energy analyst at Greenlink, and joined by my colleague, Stephanie Varughese, another analyst at Greenlink. Glad to be with y'all today, and thanks again, everyone, for being here. Yeah, we're going to take some time now to expand a bit more on kind of some of the content of the stakeholder engagement that Robert talked a lot about and how data ties into those engagement activities. So what we'll do is I'll spend a few minutes first giving some high-level comments on data in clean energy planning, and then I'll pass it over to Stephanie, and she is going to do sort of a more focused dive into a tool that we call ACEs, that we use a lot here at Greenlink, and that was used, as Robert mentioned, in the Decatur process. So that's the game plan for the next few minutes. If we can go to the next slide. So from a high level standpoint, I'm going to touch on three different things. First, I'll talk about the role of technical expertise in stakeholder engagement. Second, I'll talk about data and modeling tools in energy planning. And third, I'll talk about the policy element in implementing policies that make changes in the real world. So if we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so technical expertise, and I think the key word on this slide is supporting, because I think technical expertise, it tends to play a supporting role in a good energy planning process, the lead role being played by the community as a whole. But technical expertise can play an important role in developing a common information base among the community, and in fostering general understanding of the key topics that are involved in energy planning. And that really can help set up a more inclusive community conversation and just a more robust conversation about what the community wants to do. And now typically, communities have a lot of local expertise, and Decatur was a great example of that. Like Robert mentioned, there were folks from the HVAC industry that knew a lot about energy efficiency in buildings and shared that at some of the 202s and roundtables. There were solar installers that shared about solar technologies. There were CBOs that came and spoke about equity. Some of us at Greenlink helped round out some of the topics that were covered in those roundtables. So for example, we talked about things like baseline energy forecasts. We talked about our GEM mapping tool, like we're showing here on the slide, and looked at energy burden in the census tracts of Decatur, looked at how many households in each census tract are in severe energy burden today, things like that. So technical expertise, again, a key supporting role. If we can go to the next slide. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is the data and modeling piece. So really at some point, to be successful with energy planning, I think you have to be getting a clear picture of the energy use in the community today, and then also where things are headed. And that's where data comes in, and modeling to project what the future might look like. So for example, you need to know about the existing building stock to know how much energy efficiency potential there is, or to know how much roof space there is where you could put solar panels on roofs. So data and modeling are important. And ACES is a modeling tool that we mentioned a couple of times here that we have at Greenlink and was used in the Decatur process. Like I said, Stephanie's going to dive into some of the details of that in just a minute. But ACES at the highest level is really a way to tie in data and software tools while keeping it community driven and keeping it accessible. And so the way it works is users of the tool can decide how much of different types of energy actions to pursue. And then the model does calculations based on what the user decided to pursue, and then shows the user, okay, what are the range of outcomes that you'd be expected to see from taking the actions that you took. So it shows things about traditional costs and benefits. It shows jobs impacts. It shows energy burden impacts. So a whole range of different types of outcomes. So what we do is we load ACES up with data specific to the community. We design the energy actions based on the stakeholder engagement sessions. The community can then use the tool and provide feedback, which we can then iterate at that point and continue to refine the tool and customize it so that it's as useful as we can make it in the community. Okay, and then if we can go on to the next slide. So the last thing that I wanted to touch on is the policy piece of this. And as probably everybody knows, we can do calculations till we're blue in the face, but if we're not changing a policy or regulation, we might not be changing much. So the policy stage of this is crucial. And another tool that we used in the Decatur process was something that we call the policy toolkit. And there's a little screenshot here on the left. It's really a database of 70 energy policies that communities have adopted all over the country. And it categorizes them by the sector that they impact, and it ranks them based on things like feasibility, cost effectiveness, equity impacts. And so it allows the community to easily filter through this comprehensive list of policies and find the ones that match up well with what they looked at in a model like ACES and the community values that they most wanted to reflect and the energy actions that they found were going to be the best in their community. And so the picture on the right is showing a bit more about how this was used in the Decatur process. So this is showing one of the boards that was up in some of the engagement sessions in the open house, where the policy toolkit had been used to find some different policies that reflected what we did in ACES and list them out, and then let the community comment on those lists. And this is one of the dot exercise that Robert mentioned. So you can see folks put up some green dots by the policies that they thought made sense and were consistent with community goals, put up some orange or red dots against ones that didn't make as much sense, and were able to put up sticky notes if they wanted to kind of explain what they did there. So similar to what we just did in this interactive session too. And so that was the high level overview. And I'll go ahead and pass it off to Stephanie, talk a little bit more about ACEs. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, Kenneth. Yeah, so we're just gonna talk fairly quickly about what the ACEs tool can do and how it can assist at the community level. So ACEs is shorthand for Advanced Clean Energy Scenario. And kind of what it sounds like, it is a tool that can be used to kind of simulate a range of pathways towards clean energy futures. And these pathways are defined by users. So the way that users can interact with this tool is that they can determine the amount of progress that is made towards several clean energy options along the clean energy resources, including energy efficiency, solar power, electric vehicles, and other public transit options, some of which include things like commuter programs and other programs that reduce vehicle miles traveled. And if we click one more time, thank you, you can see that these are the inputs that users can interact with and actually change within the model itself. And you'll notice that these are defined in terms of percentage. It's a little bit small, but currently this ACES model is set to 100%. And what's nice about the ACES tool is that built into the model are calculations that define how much progress can be made along each of these clean energy options. As Kenneth mentioned, in any community, there are going to be specific physical and technical limitations in how much progress you can actually achieve. So what's nice about ACES is that this is already calculated specific for the community that we're modeling. And so users can just focus on selecting how much progress they want to make relative to what's possible. So they can choose anywhere from 0 to 100% along each of these clean energy options. This helps users create specific pathways that are defined according to their own values and interests and represent the collective values and interests of that community. What program did we use to create the ACES model? So the ACES tool is built in Excel. Yeah. And why ACES is useful is beyond being able to select these options and the level of investments that community members want to make, is that an output of the tool itself is that you can see the value of each of these clean energy investments beyond more typical impacts like climate impacts. So you can see the impact not just on emissions, but also on public healthcare costs and household level costs and job creation and energy burden. And we'll get into that in just a minute. And all of these outputs are summarized fairly concisely in an output that's called the ACES report card. Thank you. So this is what the report card looks like. And there are many different components on here. I apologize, it's a bit teeny, but we'll take a closer look at each of these components in more detail. If we go to the next slide. So this particular section of the report card outlines the cumulative impacts to public health once users are done changing those inputs, as we talked about earlier. The ACES tool allows for more accurate estimates of the total emissions that would result based on these clean energy investments, because this is the forecasting used is built on real-time utility operations and real-time utility emissions as a result. And built in to the emissions analysis is also how these emissions are dispersed and where they end up aggregating. And of course, the resultant healthcare costs from exposure and household level healthcare savings as a result of lowered emissions is something you can see as well. The ACES tool also gives users information on the cumulative impact of their clean energy investments on the economy at a community-wide level. It includes information on how the combination of clean energy investments would impact local industries rather than more general industries. So you get a more accurate assessment of how local jobs and local industries associated with clean energy would be impacted as a direct result. We have 12 different industries associated with clean energy built into this analysis. And of course, we include indicators like total jobs created and GDP growth, as well as more general indicators, including overall cost effectiveness and the net present value of all costs and benefits, and a ratio of all costs to benefits that a lot of community members and policymakers are going to be looking for as well. If we go to the next slide, thank you. The ACES report card is also going to give us the impact to household energy burden, which is the main indicator of energy equity in this tool. So you can see what it is relative to if you didn't do anything, what the energy burden would be, and what the impact of your clean energy investments, how that would change the energy burden if you didn't do anything. So that's a useful tool as well. It also gives really good detailed information on what the impact to households' bill savings would be as a result of the clean energy investments that users select. And it gives another level of detail as to how different homeowners would be impacted relative to whether or not they're participating in energy efficiency programs or other utility programs. It gives a breakdown of how what was categorized as participants in these programs versus non-participants in these programs, what their household bill savings would be also. And that's it. Were there any questions that I missed in the chat about the ACES tool?
See, I think we actually had a question, and Robert, you may be one to answer this, from Ella. Is it important to make these exercises less susceptible to groupthink and social effects?
you're muted, Robert.
So what I just said was amazing, and I'm sorry everyone missed it. But anyway, I'll try to recapture it. One of the beauties of the variety of engagement that we utilized and really is that it allows people to engage with the information at a level that is appropriate for them. With the survey, obviously you've got questions that are pertinent, and it's always difficult to remove every bias inside of a survey question, but that's as a reasonable a way to get true input. The charrette process engages stakeholders sort of individually as well as in groups, and so that's, as I mentioned earlier in that presentation, it democratizes that engagement and democratizes the input so that a loud voice who maybe stands up at a meeting doesn't overwhelm the input that we gather. So I think that our ability to remove our own biases is always a challenge, but it is by giving as many opportunities and as wide a variety of engagement styles as possible, you do try to you do ultimately eliminate a good bit of the groupthink on that process. Thank you for the question.
All right, yeah, thank you. Any other questions folks may have around what we've gone over? Go ahead and feel free to either place them in the chat or just sound off. All right, well, if we have no other questions, thank you for joining us today. We do have a companion article written by our comms director that just went into the chat. There's a companion piece to this exercise and community of practice. We will be having our next one on April 27th. At 1 p.m. Eastern. Be on the lookout for that email this week. And thank you so much for joining us today, and y'all have a good rest of your day.